"Do you want me to stop?" the millionaire whispered, and her silence was the sweetest answer he'd ever received. What happened in that moment surprised everyone. "Tell me, where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you want to find out how this captivating story ends." The champagne spilled onto her blue silk dress when she stumbled on the steps of the Fairmont Copley Plaza in Boston, and it was at that precise, humiliating moment, with the breeze from the Charles River carrying its characteristic scent, that their eyes met for the first time. The millionaire didn't laugh. Instead, he removed his own Italian-tailored jacket and offered it with a kindness she never would have expected from someone so powerful. Audra Winters, frozen in that awkward posture, felt the indiscreet gazes of the guests converging on her like merciless spotlights. The dark stain was spreading on the precious fabric she had spent weeks saving up to afford. Her cheeks burned with shame. "Don't worry, these things happen even to the most experienced of us," murmured the man, extending his jacket to her. His voice carried the assurance of someone accustomed to solving much more complex problems than a stained dress. "Thank you, but I can't accept," she began, before her eyes lifted to meet his. Blue against brown, experience against innocence. "I insist," he said with a smile that for the first time that evening seemed authentic among all those calculating faces. "I'm Thaddeus Everett, but please call me Thad." She hesitated for a moment before taking the jacket and draping it over her shoulders. The subtle scent emanating from it evoked cedar wood and a confidence that the young woman didn't yet possess. "Audra Winters," she responded, unaware that this evening had been meticulously orchestrated for this encounter. "I'm a nursing student. I'm only here for—" "The Everett Innovation Scholarship," he completed. "I know. It's my company that funds it." What she didn't know then was that this seemingly fortuitous encounter had been carefully planned weeks in advance, and that her life was about to change in a way she could never have imagined. Because in this world of glass and gold, even the most humiliating accidents can be the first notes of a skillfully composed symphony. Audra contemplated the message on her phone, nervously biting her lower lip. A dinner invitation from Thaddeus Everett, 3 days after their meeting at the Fairmont. She was sitting in the small kitchen of her shared apartment in Cambridge, where the smell of cheap coffee permeated the air, and her anatomy textbooks were precariously stacked on the wobbly table. "You should go," insisted her roommate Wren, absently flipping through a magazine. "It's not every day a millionaire asks you out." "Exactly," sighed Audra. "What could a man like him want with a girl like me?" The answer came in the form of a discreet restaurant in Beacon Hill, where candles cast dancing shadows on the 18th century stone walls. Thad wore a more casual suit, which paradoxically made him more intimidating in its expensive simplicity. "Why did you choose nursing?" he asked after ordering a Bordeaux whose price would have covered a month of Audra's rent. She hesitated, then decided to be honest. "My grandmother was a nurse in Portland during the war. She always said that in a world that constantly builds new walls, healing is the most direct way to break them down." He looked at her with a new intensity, as if discovering an unexpected treasure. "That's precisely the kind of perspective my world desperately lacks." The meetings multiplied. The Museum of Fine Arts on a Sunday, a walk along the Charles River on a Wednesday evening, an impromptu dinner at a bistro near Quincy Market. Each time she discovered a new aspect of this man, his encyclopedic knowledge of Boston architecture, his attachment to an old dog he had saved from a shelter, his ability to truly listen without the impatience characteristic of powerful people. But in the shadow of this budding idyll, rumors were circulating. His real estate empire was the subject of a discreet investigation for irregularities on the California coast. His public image needed to be softened, humanized. And what better way to achieve this than alongside a young and idealistic nursing student? In his office with large windows overlooking Beacon Hill, his communications director, Lawrence Morris, placed a file on his desk. "The first photos of you two at the restaurant have already diverted media attention from the investigation," he noted with satisfaction. "If you continue like this in a few months, no one will remember these ridiculous accusations." Thad stared at the photos spread out before him. Audra's face, illuminated by a spontaneous laugh he had provoked. Something knotted in his chest. "This is not what I want," he said with an unusually hesitant voice. "Excuse me? Take this file back. This stays between us." Lawrence raised a perplexed eyebrow, but obeyed. What he didn't know was that for the first time in years, Thaddeus Everett was no longer following a calculated plan, and this improvisation frightened him as much as it exhilarated him. The lights of the Boston skyline twinkled like fireflies trapped in steel, visible from the terrace of Thad's apartment in Back Bay. Audra, leaning against the railing, felt the weight of his gaze upon her. "What's worrying you?" she asked without turning around, her voice barely audible over the rustling of the maple leaves below. "How do you know something's worrying me?" he replied, surprised by her intuition. She turned to him, her face half in shadow, half illuminated by the amber glow of the lanterns. "You have this way of rolling your wine glass between your fingers when you're thinking too intensely." A melancholic smile crossed his face. In 3 months, this young woman had observed him more attentively than his ex-wife had in 7 years of marriage. Ex-wife, or rather, wife from whom he was not yet legally divorced. The guilt of this omission weighed heavily on him. "My company is going through a delicate period," he finally said, opting for a half-truth. "The investigation into the California coast constructions?" she asked simply. Surprise painted his face. "How do you know about that?" "The internet exists, Thad, and contrary to what you might think, nursing students also know how to read economic news." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, thick as the fog that was beginning to rise from the Charles River. "Is that why you approached me at the Fairmont? To improve your image?" The question was direct, devoid of accusation, but charged with anticipated pain. Thad set down his glass and approached her, taking her hands in his. "At the beginning, maybe. I won't lie to you about that, but what happened next?" "What happened next, what?" she insisted, her eyes searching for truth in his. "What happened next wasn't planned," he murmured. "You weren't supposed to be you." The phrase, awkward but sincere, floated between them. Audra should have left, slammed the door, ended this manipulation. But something in the new vulnerability of this usually so controlled man prevented her. "Is there anything else I should know?" she asked, offering him a chance to reveal everything. He hesitated, thinking about his technically still valid marriage, the legal complications, the potentially devastating articles if the truth came to light. "No," he finally lied. "Nothing else." That night, under the full Boston moon, when the air carried the scent of jasmine from the public garden and the distant sound of a street performer playing a jazz standard, his lips brushed her neck, and she surrendered to what she believed was the honesty of a new beginning. But lies, even those of omission, have an insidious way of infiltrating the strongest foundations, like water that always finds a crack in stone. "Everett still married." The headline of the gossip magazine spread out in garish red letters on the cover, that Bryn, a classmate and occasional friend of Audra's, slid across the university cafeteria table. "Congratulations, you're officially Boston's most visible mistress," she added with a mixture of jealousy and genuine concern. Audra felt the blood drain from her face as her eyes scanned the article. Photos of Thad with an elegant woman on his arm at a charity gala dating back 4 years. Quotes from a source close to the couple claiming that the divorce papers had never been signed. Speculations about the real estate magnate's new relationship with an anonymous student. "It's not possible," she whispered with trembling hands. "You didn't know?" asked Bryn, her expression shifting from teasing to compassion. The rest of the day passed in an indistinct fog. The lectures on medical ethics and pharmacology unfolded without her registering a single word. Her phone vibrated constantly, Thad trying to reach her. She ignored it. It was only in the late afternoon that she decided to take a train to New York, where he was participating in a conference on sustainable urban planning, an irony that didn't escape her now that she knew about the ongoing investigation into his practices. The office he temporarily occupied in a building facing Central Park offered a breathtaking view of the park, in such intense autumn colors that it seemed artificial. Thad rose abruptly when she entered without announcement. "Audra, I've been trying to—" She tossed the magazine onto his desk, cutting short his explanations. 3 months, Thad. 3 months and you couldn't find a single occasion to mention you were married. Technically married, he corrected, before realizing the futility of this distinction. It's been over with her for 3 years. We live separately. We have separate lives. But not separate legal statuses, she retorted. You should have told me. He approached her, but she stepped back. For the first time, she saw his blue eyes mist over, a vulnerability he had never shown, even in their most intimate moments. "You're right," he admitted, his voice losing its usual confidence. "I should have. I was afraid that it would be too complicated, that you wouldn't want to get involved. What's complicated is discovering the truth in a gossip magazine." Her voice broke on the last words. "Do you know what it feels like to realize that everyone around you knew something so fundamental, except you?" A heavy silence settled, punctuated only by the distant sound of traffic and the rustling of leaves in Central Park. "The papers are blocked by legal complications," he finally explained. "Her family owns shares in my company. There are complex clauses, assets to divide." "How long?" she asked abruptly. "Pardon? How long to finalize all this?" "To be honest, for once?" He hesitated, mentally calculating. 6 months at most. I promise complete transparency from now on." Audra closed her eyes for a moment, weighing her options. She loved him. It was a truth she could no longer deny, despite the anger bubbling within her. But could she trust him? 6 months, she finally repeated. "Not one day more, and I want to see all the papers, all the developments." "Everything," he promised, cautiously advancing to take her hands. This time she did not step back. Leaving New York that evening, watching from the train window as the coastal lights disappeared into the night, Audra reflected on the nature of truths and lies. Sometimes, she thought, the line between the two resembles less a clear border than a twilight, where light and shadow blend until they become indistinguishable. The great amphitheater of the Harvard Medical School seemed colder than usual that morning. Audra had slipped into her usual spot in the third row, but the seats around her had remained empty, a new phenomenon since the article about her relationship with Thad had surfaced. Professor Harrington, a specialist in medical ethics, was scanning the audience during his lecture on informed consent, an irony that didn't escape Audra. "Miss Winters," he suddenly called, "since you seem particularly concerned with issues of complete information and transparency in relationships, perhaps you could enlighten us on the ethical implications of a doctor who willfully withholds information from their patient." Stifled laughter rippled through the amphitheater. The reference to her personal situation was barely veiled. "Omission is a form of lying," she responded, her voice firmer than she would have thought possible. "But context and intent matter too. Sometimes it's not so much the information being hidden that creates the problem, but the reason why it's hidden." The professor raised an eyebrow, visibly surprised by the measured response. "An interesting nuance. Continue." "In a medical context," she continued, feeling the gaze of her classmates weighing on her, "trust is the foundation of any therapeutic relationship. Once broken, it can be repaired, but never restored to what it originally was." A silence settled, and for the first time in days, it wasn't a silence of judgment, but of reflection. As the lecture ended, Meredith, a student with whom she had shared many practical exercises, waited for her. "That was brave, what you said," she commented, walking alongside her. "Not really. I just answered the question. You know very well it wasn't just an academic question. Harrington wanted to put you on the spot." Audra sighed. "Everyone seems to think I've abandoned my principles for a rich man. And haven't you?" "No," she responded firmly. "Maybe I made the mistake of trusting too quickly, but I haven't abandoned who I am." Meredith nodded, thoughtful. "You know, Bryn is spreading rumors that you cheated on exams thanks to your friend's influence. Bryn Peters. Always first in the class until Audra surpassed her in the first semester exams. And who had tried unsuccessfully to attract Thad's attention during the scholarship award ceremony." "Why am I not surprised?" murmured Audra. That night, in the small apartment she still shared with Wren, despite Thad's repeated offers to set her up in a more comfortable place, Audra made a decision. She wouldn't flee the gazes and whispers. She wouldn't apologize for the choices she had made. And above all, she wouldn't allow this relationship to define her identity or compromise her professional future. The next day, she submitted a formal request to complete her final internship at a community clinic in Roxbury, far from the prestigious hospitals where Thad's influence might have been suspected. It would be more difficult, the conditions would be harsher, but it would be her choice, her path. When she announced her decision to Thad during their dinner that evening, at a small bistro in Cambridge, he remained silent for a long moment. "You're the bravest person I've ever met," he finally said. and I probably don't deserve you." She smiled, melancholic. "Probably not. But that's for me to decide, isn't it?" For the first time since they had known each other, it was she who was leading the dance. And this role reversal, though subtle, marked the beginning of a new balance in their relationship. The thick file landed on the mahogany desk with a dull thud. Thad stared at the document stamped confidential that his lawyer had just handed him in his Boston office. "It's worse than we thought," announced Attorney Fletcher, a man with graying temples whose usually impassive expression betrayed a rare concern. The permits for the 3 complexes near Big Sur were clearly obtained through irregular procedures. Thad passed a tired hand over his face. "I wasn't even involved in these projects. It was before I took full presidency of the group." "It doesn't matter. You're the face of the company now. If this matter blows up publicly, the damage will be considerable." The phone vibrated on the desk. A message from Audra. "How's your day going? I thought of you during my palliative care class today. Strangely inspiring." This simple message, devoid of pretense, gave birth to an idea. For weeks, he had been shutting himself away in secrecy, consulting only lawyers and public relations experts. But perhaps he needed a completely different perspective. That evening, he did something he had never considered before. He shared a major professional problem with someone outside his business circle. In his apartment, documents spread across the coffee table, he explained the situation to Audra in its entirety. "The problem," he concluded, "is that even though I wasn't directly involved, publicly acknowledging these irregularities would expose the company to massive lawsuits. But hiding them isn't ethical and probably not sustainable in the long term." Audra studied the documents in silence, her forehead wrinkled in intense concentration. Her nursing training seemed to have no relation to this real estate crisis, yet Thad awaited her response with an anticipation he had never felt before his best-paid consultants. "Have you ever heard of the full disclosure protocol in medicine?" she finally asked. He shook his head, intrigued. "When a medical error occurs, the best practice isn't to protect oneself with silence, but to fully inform the patient, express sincere regret, and detail the corrective measures. Statistically, this reduces lawsuits rather than increases them." "You're suggesting that I engage an independent audit team," she completed. "Voluntarily publish the full results, with a clear action plan to rectify all discovered irregularities. Show that you're taking the initiative even before the authorities intervene." "It's risky," he murmured. "Very risky." "Riskier than waiting for everything to blow up?" she asked gently. 3 days later, Thad announced at a press conference the appointment of an independent audit commission to examine all the permitting practices of the Everett Group over the past 10 years. The news was met with astonishment by the Boston business community. "You've lost your mind," accused Gerald Davis, his oldest associate, in a tense phone conversation from San Francisco. "It's commercial suicide." "It's a new beginning," replied Thad with a quiet confidence he didn't know he possessed. That evening, watching the news cover his decision with a mixture of skepticism and interest, he realized that for the first time in his career, his actions weren't motivated solely by profit or even the company's survival, but by something more fundamental: integrity. And this revelation was as liberating as it was frightening. Audra, nestled against him on the couch, observed his thoughtful profile in the bluish light of the television. "You did the right thing," she said simply. "Thanks to you," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "You reminded me that there are more important things than saving appearances." What he didn't say, but deeply felt, was that this young woman whom he had initially approached for superficial reasons was transforming his life in a way that none of his highly paid consultants could ever have anticipated. The news had fallen like a thunderbolt in an already stormy sky. Lawrence, Thad's legal director, had discovered that Genevieve, his ex-wife, had hidden significant assets in accounts in Maine during their initial separation. "It's the proof we've been waiting for," he explained, his eyes bright with professional satisfaction. "With this, we can expedite the divorce procedure and bypass the blocks she's put in place." In an office with ancient moldings near the Supreme Judicial Court, the atmosphere was electric. Audra, present at Thad's express request, a decision that had raised more than one eyebrow among the lawyers, observed the exchanges with fascination mixed with discomfort. Genevieve Everett, née Blackwood, was the embodiment of Boston elegance. Tall, slender, With impeccably styled chestnut hair and piercing green eyes, she exuded an icy confidence that contrasted violently with Audra's natural warmth. She hadn't seemed surprised to see the young student alongside her husband. "So this is her," she had simply commented, scrutinizing Audra from head to toe. "Younger than I imagined." Thad had stiffened, but Audra had held her gaze without flinching. "Mrs. Everett," she had politely greeted, "I would have preferred to meet you under different circumstances." A fleeting smile had crossed Genevieve's face. "I doubt it, but it doesn't matter." The discovery of the main accounts had changed the dynamics of the meeting. From accuser, Genevieve had become defensive, then quickly conciliatory, when she understood that her position was no longer tenable. "You'll have your papers," she had finally declared to Thad. "But don't imagine for a second that I'm giving up what's rightfully mine." "I never wanted to deprive you of anything, Genevieve," Thad had replied with a weariness that suggested years of similar conflicts. "I just need to move forward." Leaving the office, Audra had felt a strange mixture of victory and melancholy. The woman they were leaving behind had shared 7 years of Thad's life, 7 years of history of which she was not a part. "What are you thinking about?" asked Thad as they walked along the Charles River, the last rays of the sun transforming the water into a ribbon of molten gold. "I'm wondering how you got to this point," she responded honestly. "You must have loved each other in the beginning." He remained silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then finally, "We did love each other, yes, but not for the right reasons. She loved what I represented: success, ambition, social status. And I think I loved the idea of having someone who perfectly matched the image I wanted to project. And now?" He stopped, turning to face Audra, taking her hands in his. "Now, I love a woman who sees me as I truly am, who challenges me to be better, not just to appear better." The 4th month of the deadline she had granted him was ending. The divorce would soon be finalized, earlier than expected. But this resolution brought new pressures. Thad's family, Boston high society, all now expected an officialization of their relationship, despite the age difference that still scandalized some conservative circles. "My mother wants to meet you," he announced as they reached the Longfellow Bridge. Officially this time, not just as a scholarship recipient. Audra felt a wave of apprehension pass through her. Thad's mother, Vivian Everett, was a figure in Boston aristocracy, known for her demanding standards and attachment to traditions. "She'll hate me," she whispered. "Probably," he admitted with an unexpected smile, "at least at first, but that's precisely why I know you're the right person. You're the first I don't feel obligated to impress at all costs." That night, they celebrated the advancement of the divorce with a bottle of Taitinger champagne on the apartment terrace. The city stretched out before them, a sea of lights and possibilities. But in Audra's eyes danced an unformulated question. Now that external obstacles were beginning to dissipate, would they be able to navigate together in this new, unknown territory? The morning sun flooded Thad's vast office with golden light that reflected off the architectural models scattered across the conference table. Audra observed him from the threshold, fascinated by his concentration as he examined plans with surgical precision. "You wanted to see me?" she finally asked, breaking her silent contemplation. He looked up, and his face instantly lit up. "Yes. Come in. I have something important to show you." He cleared a space among the documents and unfolded a map of North America, on which several points were marked in red. Chicago, Seattle, San Francisco, New York, Montreal. "What is it?" "Our itinerary," he announced, an unusual excitement in his voice. "I've identified the most innovative community health programs in North America. Initiatives that truly change people's lives in disadvantaged neighborhoods." Audra traced the map with her finger, intrigued. "Is this for the foundation you told me about?" "Exactly. I want to create something that has a real impact, not just a public relations exercise. But for that I need to see what's already working elsewhere." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "And I'd like you to come with me. 6 months exploring these projects, meeting the people on the ground, imagining together what we could create in Boston." Audra remained frozen, slowly assimilating the scope of the proposal. 6 months traveling across North America, an extraordinary opportunity to see innovative health systems in action, to contribute to the creation of something meaningful, but also 6 months away from the university, postponing obtaining her degree, disappointing her parents who had sacrificed so much for her education. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, scanning the map again. "Say yes," he gently insisted. "It would be extraordinary. We could combine your medical expertise and my knowledge of organizational structures, create something unique. And my studies? You could take a leave. It's only 6 months. And think of the experience you'd gain, much more valuable than any theoretical course." She felt a prick of irritation at this apparent nonchalance toward her education. "It's not that simple, Thad. I would be the first in my family to earn a university degree." "I understand, but—" "No, I don't think you do understand," she interrupted him. "You've built an empire. That's remarkable. But my degree represents something just as important to me and my family as your company does to you." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Thad looked at her, as if seeing her in a new light. "I need to think about it," she finally said. "It's an important decision." "Of course," he conceded, trying to mask his disappointment. "Take all the time you need." Leaving the office, Audra felt the weight of 2 divergent paths weighing on her shoulders. Choosing the journey would mean fully embracing this new life with Thad, this exhilarating adventure that surpassed anything she could have imagined. But at what cost? That evening, in her small apartment, she called her parents in Vermont. Her mother's voice, warm and comforting, resonated through the phone. "A foundation? With your Thad?" marveled Lydia Winters. "It sounds wonderful, darling." "But I would have to interrupt my studies," explained Audra. "Postpone my degree." A thoughtful silence followed. "Then, when I was your age, I received an offer to study medicine at Columbia." "What? You never told me about that." "Because I didn't do it. I met your father, we got married, and then you came along. I don't regret anything. My life has been beautiful, but sometimes I wonder." The unfinished phrase floated in the air, laden with abandoned dreams and roads not taken. "What should I do, Mom?" "I can't decide for you, darling, but remember one thing. In life, we rarely regret the opportunities we take. It's the ones we let pass by that haunt us." That night, Audra couldn't find sleep. Her mother's words echoed in her head, mingled with images of the possibilities Thad had laid out before her. At dawn, exhausted but resolute, she made her decision. The small Vermont village of Stowe seemed frozen in time, with its white clapboard houses, narrow streets, and shaded squares, where elderly men played checkers under the benevolent gaze of century-old maple trees. It was here, far from the Boston tumult and the pressure of imminent decisions, that Audra had sought refuge to reflect. The family home, an old wooden structure with thick walls that kept the coolness even in the heart of summer, was steeped in memories. Every corner, every object told a story of generations of Winters who had worked hard, loved deeply, and always privileged integrity over material comfort. "You look worried," observed Cyrus Winters, her father, as they walked together among the maples that bordered the property. A man with calloused hands and a face weathered by the sun, he had spent his life cultivating the land with a patience and determination that commanded respect. "I have to make a difficult decision," admitted Audra, stopping to touch the rough bark of a particularly ancient maple. "About your Boston man?" She smiled despite herself. Her father never pronounced Thad's name, as if naming him would make too real this relationship that was distancing her from her roots. "In part, he's proposed that I travel with him for 6 months to study innovative health programs. It's an incredible opportunity, but you would have to postpone your degree," he completed. She nodded. "And I don't know if it's the right decision. If I leave with him, am I not doing exactly what everyone reproaches me for? Abandoning my ambitions for a man?" Cyrus stopped, gazing at the horizon where the green mountains stood out in the golden light of sunset. "When I met your mother, she was the brightest student in her class. She could have become a doctor. She chose a different life with me, she told me, and she has regrets, doesn't she?" "Regrets? No. Questions, sometimes. It's not the same thing." He turned to her, his eyes reflecting a quiet wisdom. "The real question isn't whether you should choose between your studies and this man. It's whether you can find a path that honors both parts of yourself." These words resonated within her like a revelation. Throughout this week of reflection, she had unconsciously posed the problem as a binary choice, Thad or her career, love or independence? That evening, sitting under the pergola where the scent of wild thyme and lavender scented the warm air, she had a long conversation with her mother. Lydia Winters had always been the quiet strength of the family, the one who knew how to find solutions where others saw only obstacles. "You don't need to give up your dreams to love someone," she affirmed, pouring a glass of local apple cider. "Nor give up love to achieve your ambitions. Women have carried this false dilemma for too long. But concretely, what can I do? The trip starts in a month. Propose an alternative, something that allows both of you to get what you need." Seated under the Vermont stars, listening to the song of the crickets that had lulled her childhood, Audra began to outline a plan. A compromise that wouldn't be a capitulation, but a new path, her own path. 2 days later, she was back in Boston, her heart light and her mind clear for the first time in weeks. Thad was waiting for her in the station hall, visibly nervous, a bouquet of pink peonies in hand, her favorite flowers. "I was afraid you wouldn't come back," he admitted as they walked toward his car. "I've made my decision," she announced simply. He stopped, visibly preparing himself for a disappointment. "I understand if you can't interrupt your studies. I shouldn't have asked you to—" "I won't interrupt my studies," she confirmed, "and I won't give up participating in your foundation project either." He frowned, confused. "I don't understand. I have a counter-proposal. I finish my degree first. Only 4 more months now. In the meantime, I work with you part-time to plan the foundation. We start with shorter visits, in New England. After my degree, we can consider longer trips." Thad looked at her with an indecipherable expression. "You've planned everything." "Yes, because I refuse to choose between you and my career. I want both, and I believe we can find a way to make both work." A slow smile illuminated his face, not the calculated smile of the businessman, but the rarer and more precious one of the man who was discovering with wonder the strength of character of the woman he loved. "This solution seems perfect to me," he said simply. And so, in the midst of the tumult of South Station, surrounded by hurried travelers, they sealed a new pact, not the one he had imagined, nor even the one she might have envisioned a few months earlier, but a creative compromise that respected the needs and dreams of each. The Boston autumn had transformed the public garden into a symphony of reds and golds, the leaves crunching under Audra's steps as she ran to reach the amphitheater before the lecture began. 3 consecutive nights of work on the foundation project had left her exhausted, her course notes scattered on the kitchen table, half-reviewed. Professor Caldwell, a specialist in pediatric intensive care, interrupted his explanation of emergency protocols when she discreetly slipped in through the back door. "Miss Winters, what an honor to see you join us," he commented dryly. "I hope your philanthropic activities leave you enough time to study the cases I assigned last week." A heavy silence fell on the amphitheater. Rumors about her involvement in the future Everett Foundation had spread like wildfire through the faculty. "Of course, Professor," she responded, refusing to be intimidated. "The case of severe hypoglycemia in the type 1 diabetic child presented secondary neurological complications that required a multidisciplinary approach." The professor raised an eyebrow, visibly surprised by her preparation. "Continue." For the next 15 minutes, Audra detailed the case and the appropriate interventions with a precision that commanded respect. When she finished, several students discreetly applauded, and even the professor slightly inclined his head in approval. This small victory was short-lived. As the lecture ended, Bryn was waiting for her, flanked by 2 other students. "Impressive performance," she commented with a venomous smile. "You must have memorized it just for the occasion." "What do you want, Bryn?" sighed Audra, too tired for a new confrontation. "The truth? I want to understand how someone who claims to care about medical ethics can associate with a man whose company destroyed acres of protected areas to build luxury complexes." The blow struck home because it touched on a concern that Audra herself had had. "You know nothing about him, nor about his efforts to rectify these past mistakes," she responded, more sharply than she would have liked. "I know that your precious foundation is just a public relations exercise to polish his image. And you're too blinded by love, or money, to see it." Audra clenched her fists, fighting the impulse to respond to this provocation. Instead, she turned away and walked off with a firm step, ignoring the mocking calls that followed her. That evening, In Thad's apartment, she stared unseeingly at her computer screen, displaying a document on community health systems in Chicago. Bryn's comment still echoed in her mind, reviving doubts she thought she had resolved. "You're distant tonight," observed Thad, handing her a cup of bergamot tea, her favorite when she was stressed. "Just tired," she lied. He sat down across from her, gently closing her laptop. "Audra, I know you now. Something is bothering you." She hesitated, then decided that honesty was the only viable policy between them. "Bryn Peters suggested that our foundation is just a public relations exercise for you, a way to make people forget about your company's environmental problems." Thad remained silent for a long time, his face unreadable. "And do you believe it?" he finally asked, his voice calm but tense. "No," she responded immediately. Then, after a pause, "But sometimes I wonder if we're not rushing, if we really have the expertise necessary to create something meaningful, or if we're letting ourselves be carried away by enthusiasm." He rose and walked to the window, contemplating the illuminated city. "At the beginning, when I had this idea, it was perhaps partly for image reasons," he admitted. "I won't lie to you about that, but since we started working together, meeting these street doctors, these nurses who do miracles with so few resources, something has changed." He turned back to her, and she was struck by the unusual vulnerability in his eyes. "For the first time in my life, I'm building something not to prove my worth or increase my wealth, but because it's necessary." Audra felt a lump in her throat. "I'm sorry I doubted." "Don't be. Your doubts, your questions, they keep me honest. They keep us honest." He approached and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "If you think we're going too fast, we'll slow down. If you believe we need more expertise, we'll find it. This foundation will be authentic, or it won't be." That night, nestled against him in the vast bed that had become their refuge against the outside world, Audra reflected on the fragile balances they were trying to maintain. Between ambition and ethics, between great love and practical life, between the dream and its concrete realization. The path they had chosen wasn't the easiest. Some days the fatigue seemed insurmountable, the obstacles innumerable. But in these moments of doubt, she remembered the century-old maples of the family property in Vermont, their quiet strength, their resilience in the face of storms, their capacity to thrive even in rocky soil. Perhaps their love, as improbable as it may have seemed at the beginning, possessed that same resilience. The Everett estate in Newport, Rhode Island, seemed straight out of an F. Scott Fitzgerald novel. A colonial-style mansion with white walls, surrounded by century-old oaks and terraced gardens, descending toward the turquoise Atlantic. Audra, dressed in a simple white summer dress she had bought specially for the occasion, felt her heart beating in her throat as the car pulled into the gravel driveway. "They're going to hate me," she murmured, nervously adjusting a lock of hair. "Probably," confirmed Thad with disarming frankness, before adding with an encouraging smile, "At first, at least. Is that supposed to reassure me?" He took her hand and brought it to his lips. "You've faced hostile professors, jealous classmates, and the worst aspects of my personality. My family is just another obstacle, and certainly not the most difficult one." The introductions unfolded exactly as Audra had dreaded. Vivian Everett, a 65-year-old woman of intimidating elegance and piercing gaze, welcomed her with icy politeness. Her husband, Harlan, a former diplomat with an imposing build, was more cordial but clearly reserved. Dinner was an endurance test. Under the crystal chandeliers, among the fine china and family silverware, each question seemed designed to highlight the differences in class and education. "So, your father is a farmer?" asked Vivian, the word sounding strange in her mouth. "A maple syrup producer," Audra gently corrected. "He produces one of the best maple syrups in Vermont. His organic methods have been awarded several medals at the state fair." "Fascinating," commented Vivian in a tone that suggested the opposite. "And your nursing training, it's such a practical profession." "Mother," intervened Thad, an evident tension in his voice. "What?" "It's a compliment. In our family, we've always valued concrete utility, haven't we, Harlan?" Harlan Everett nodded distractedly, but his eyes remained fixed on Audra with a new curiosity. The coup de grace came at dessert, when Vivian theatrically sighed. "Of course, there's this considerable age difference, almost 20 years, isn't it? I suppose it can work for some couples, although I worry about the generational differences, life experience, expectations. The silence that followed was so dense that Audra could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the adjacent room. It was then that an unexpected voice rose, that of Gideon Everett, Thad's grandfather, a 90-year-old man who had remained silent until then. "I was 22 years older than Eleanor," he said simply, referring to his late wife. "We were married for 53 years. Age is just a number, Vivian. What matters is the compatibility of souls." Vivian seemed momentarily disconcerted but recovered quickly. "Times were different then, Father." "Not so different," replied the old man with a conspiratorial wink to Audra. The tension reached its peak when, after dinner, Vivian made a comment about the traditional family values that had always guided the Everetts. It was at that moment that Audra, gathering all her courage, spoke up in a firm but respectful voice. "Mrs. Everett, I understand your concerns. You love your son and want the best for him. But with all due respect, youth is not synonymous with naivety, just as age is not always a guarantee of wisdom." She paused, noting Vivian's surprised look. "I don't claim to have your experience or your knowledge of the world, but I bring a different perspective, a fresh look. And isn't that precisely what every family needs to evolve?" A deafening silence followed this declaration. Then, to general astonishment, Gideon Everett burst into a frank and sonorous laugh. "Good heavens," he exclaimed, "this young woman has more guts than any daughter-in-law I've known in this family for 50 years. He raised his glass in her direction. "To Audra, who reminds us that new blood is the only thing that prevents old families from fossilizing." Thad, seated beside her, discreetly squeezed her hand under the table, evident pride in his gaze. Even Harlan seemed impressed, a slight smile playing on his usually severe lips. Only Vivian remained impassive, but something in her expression had subtly changed. Not acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of a reluctant respect. Later that night, as they walked along the private beach bathed by the moonlight, Thad wrapped his arm around Audra's waist. "You were extraordinary," he murmured. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Your mother is intimidating." "She is. But you did something that no one has dared to do for years. You confronted her with grace and honesty." He stopped, contemplating the silvery sea. "You know, my grandfather took me aside after your little speech. He told me I'd better marry you before you came to your senses." Audra felt her heart stop. "And what did you answer?" He turned to her, his face serious in the pale moonlight. "I said that was my intention, but that I respected your independence too much to rush things. That some gifts deserve to be offered at the perfect moment." She smiled, touched by his understanding of her needs. "You're starting to know me pretty well, Thaddeus Everett. I hope to have a lifetime to get to know you even better, Audra Winters." That night, under the starry sky of the Rhode Island coast, something profound crystallized between them. Not a formal commitment, but a mutual understanding that their story, despite its improbable beginnings, had found its own rhythm, its own truth. The amphitheater of Harvard Medical School was packed on that June day, the excitement palpable among the students, dressed in gowns and mortarboards. Audra, seated among her classmates, felt a mixture of disbelief and pride overwhelming her. After 4 years of hard work, sleepless nights, and demanding internships, this moment seemed almost unreal. In the stands she spotted her parents, her mother discreetly wiping away a tear, her father vainly trying to hide his emotion behind a stoic expression, and next to them, slightly apart but just as attentive, Thad, elegant in a charcoal grey suit, his gaze never leaving Audra. When her name was called and she climbed onto the stage to receive her degree, an indescribable feeling of accomplishment overwhelmed her. The photograph taken at that moment, her in cap and gown, holding her degree with tears of joy, would forever capture this instant of personal triumph. The reception that followed in the university gardens was the occasion for unexpected reconciliations. Bryn Peters, who had been her fiercest critic, approached Audra with an unusually humble expression. "Congratulations," she said simply. "You proved me wrong." "About what?" asked Audra, surprised by this approach. "I was convinced you would abandon your studies for—" She glanced toward Thad, who was politely conversing with Professor Caldwell a few meters away. "For him, I was wrong, and I have to acknowledge it." This small moment of grace was followed by an even more significant encounter. Audra's parents, initially uncomfortable in this prestigious university setting, found themselves in conversation with Thad. From a distance, Audra observed the scene with fascination. Her father, the farmer with calloused hands, speaking animatedly with the Boston businessman. Her mother, usually reserved, laughing at something Thad had said. Later, as they prepared for the celebration dinner he had organized, she asked him what they had discussed. "Your father gave me a crash course in organic maple syrup production," replied Thad with a smile, "and made me promise to visit their property this summer. I think he wants to make sure I understand where you come from." "And my mother?" His expression softened. "Your mother simply told me that if I hurt you, she knew enough Vermont herbs to prepare me a tea from which I would never wake up." Audra burst out laughing. "That sounds like her." The dinner gathered a small but significant circle. Her parents, Wren and Meredith, her faithful university friends, and Gideon Everett, who had insisted on making the trip despite his advanced age. Notably absent, Vivian and Harlan Everett, who had declined the invitation with polite but transparent excuses. "They'll come to our table when they're ready," Thad had commented, with a quiet acceptance of their persistent disapproval. 3 weeks after this graduation, a new chapter opened. In a conference room in Martha's Vineyard, facing the Atlantic Ocean, whose waves crashed against the rocks below, Thad officially inaugurated the Everett Foundation for Healthcare Access. The organization would focus on scholarships for young people from disadvantaged communities who wanted to study in the health field. On the stage, he beckoned Audra to join him. Dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue suit, she stepped forward with a new confidence. "This foundation would never have seen the light of day without Audra Winters," he declared, before the assembly of journalists, medical personalities, and potential donors. "Her vision, her integrity, and her insight have shaped every aspect of this project." He handed her an official document. "That's why I'm happy to announce that Audra will be the Foundation's project coordinator, working directly with our beneficiaries and overseeing the development of our programs." Polite applause greeted this announcement, but Audra noticed the surprised looks from some members of the assembly. At 22, freshly graduated, she didn't have the typical profile of a manager in an organization of this caliber. "They expected me to become the director," she commented later, as they dined on the terrace of their hotel. "That's what I wanted to propose to you," admitted Thad. "I know, and I'm grateful to you for that, but I need to learn, to gain experience in the field before claiming to direct." She smiled, taking a sip of wine. "My youth, which many see as a disadvantage, is actually my greatest asset. I understand the difficulties of these young scholars because I was in their place just a few years ago." He contemplated her with undisguised admiration. "You never cease to impress me, Audra Winters. Your wisdom far exceeds your age." "Don't get too used to it," she joked. "I still have many immature decisions to make." That night, watching the lights of Martha's Vineyard twinkling under a starry sky, they silently contemplated the path traveled since their first meeting on the steps of the Fairmont. Every obstacle overcome, every misunderstanding resolved, every compromise negotiated, had led them to this moment of calm accomplishment. But it was only a beginning. Other challenges awaited them, other obstacles would arise in their path. The difference now was that they would face them together, stronger from everything they had already been through. Autumn had given way to a particularly harsh winter. Boston shivered under an unusual blanket of snow, transforming the city into a postcard landscape as beautiful as it was inhospitable. In the northern neighborhoods of the city, where the beautiful brownstones gave way to more modest buildings, the Everett Foundation had opened its first community clinic. Audra, wrapped in a scarf knitted by her mother, crossed the freshly painted corridors every day, supervising the training of young nurses from the scholarship program. After 6 months of operation, the results exceeded their expectations. More than 2,000 consultations, 100 successful preventive interventions, and above all, a growing sense of trust from the community toward this structure which, against all expectations, was keeping its promises. That morning, however, the atmosphere was different. Audra felt an unusual tension among the staff, furtive glances, conversations that stopped at her approach. "What's happening?" she finally asked Harper, one of the senior nurses she had personally recruited. Harper hesitated, then handed her phone. An online Boston Globe article appeared. Thaddeus Everett faces new accusations. Is the foundation a tax front? The world seemed to stop spinning as Audra scanned the article. A former employee from the accounting department claimed that funds intended for the foundation had been diverted to offshore accounts linked to the old real estate activities of the Everett Group. Worse still, the article suggested that Audra herself might be complicit, or at least a naive figurehead used to give an image of integrity to the operation. "It's absurd," she murmured, returning the phone with a trembling hand. "I personally supervised every major expense." Harper watched her carefully. "We trust you, Audra, but patients will start asking questions. We need to know what to tell them." The day passed in a fog of phone calls and emergency meetings. Thad was unreachable, apparently in meeting with his lawyers since dawn. The foundation's board of directors demanded explanations. Media were beginning to camp outside the clinic entrance. It was only late in the evening that Audra finally reached the apartment they now officially shared. She found Thad in his study, surrounded by documents, his face marked by a fatigue she had never seen in him. "I've been trying to reach you all day," she said simply. He looked up at her, and what she saw chilled her. Not guilt or defensiveness, but a deep sadness mixed with anger. "I know who's behind all this," he said in a hoarse voice. "Genevieve. Your ex-wife? But why now?" "The divorce has been final for almost a year. Because the foundation is starting to have a real impact. Because she learned that I plan to transfer a significant part of my shares in the group to the foundation." He passed a tired hand over his face. "Or maybe simply because she realized I was truly happy for the first time in years." Audra approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Is there any truth to these accusations?" He looked her straight in the eyes. "None. Every dollar has been tracked, verified, used exactly as planned. We have the auditors to prove it." "Then we'll fight," she said simply. "Together." The weeks that followed were among the most challenging of their relationship. An independent investigation was launched at their request. Journalists were digging into Audra's past, looking for the slightest sign of corruption or greed. Some donors suspended their support pending the audit's conclusions. The most painful moment came when several foundation scholars expressed doubts, fearing that their association with the organization would compromise their future career. One particularly difficult evening, after a stormy meeting with the board of directors, Audra found Thad on the terrace, staring at the illuminated city with an expression that only someone who knew him intimately could decipher. Doubt, not about his innocence, but about the value of continuing to fight. "You're thinking of giving up," she observed, approaching him. He didn't respond immediately, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. "I wonder if you wouldn't be better off without all this, without me. Your career was so promising. You could have worked anywhere." "I'm working exactly where I want to be," she replied firmly, "with whom I want to be, even if it means being dragged through the mud, suspected, questioned." She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me well, Thaddeus Everett. When we met, I was terrified of your world. I doubted my ability to adapt. I doubted your intentions. I even doubted my own feelings." Her voice became softer but more intense. "But every trial we've been through has made me stronger, more certain. This storm is just another test, and I'm not going anywhere." The audit report finally arrived, completely exonerating the foundation and Thad from any wrongdoing. The evidence clearly showed that the accusations were based on falsified documents and bought testimonies. Genevieve Everett, confronted with this evidence, suddenly disappeared abroad, tacitly confirming her guilt. The crisis, though painful, had an unexpected effect. It demonstrated the solidity of their partnership, not only personal but also professional. As a journalist wrote in a corrective article, "The Everett Foundation survived this storm not despite, but thanks to the joint leadership of its founder and its young coordinator, whose integrity proved unshakable under pressure." During a press conference organized to definitively turn the page, Audra stood beside Thad, her confidence now equal to his. When a journalist asked her what she had learned from this ordeal, her answer was simple and profound. "I learned that when two people build something with sincerity and dedication, no external force can destroy it. Storms may shake the structure, but they also reveal the solidity of the foundations." That night, nestled against each other in their bed, they shared a comfortable silence, listening to the wind rattling the windows and the distant sound of a street performer playing somewhere over the rainbow, Audra realized she had found something rare, a love that didn't diminish her because of her youth, but challenged her to grow while keeping her essence. And Thad, holding her against him, knew that true success didn't reside in properties along the coast or corporate titles conquered early, but in these moments of shared silence where two souls from different generations finally found a perfect point of balance, like the impossible harmony between tradition and renewal that defines the very essence of America. 2 years had passed since the founding of the community clinic. Boston Spring was deploying its charms, the flowering cherry trees along the avenue bordering the public garden, creating a tunnel of white and pink under which Audra walked at a leisurely pace. At 24, she now held the official title of Operations Director of the Everett Foundation, a well-deserved promotion after the resounding success of the scholarship program and the opening of 2 new clinics in suburban areas. Time had brought subtle but significant changes. Her features had refined, her gaze had gained confidence. Her walk reflected a quiet assurance that no longer had anything to prove. The intimidated young student on the steps of the Fairmont seemed to belong to another life. She stopped in front of a park fence where children played under the supervision of parents and nannies. Among them, she spotted Harper, her former recruit turned close friend, who was pushing a swing on which her 3-year-old daughter was laughing heartily. "I didn't expect to see you here," Harper marveled when Audra approached. "I needed to get some fresh air before tonight's big meeting," she explained, "and I wanted to ask if you would agree to supervise the new training program during my absence." Harper frowned. "Your absence? Are you going somewhere?" A mysterious smile formed on Audra's lips. "Maybe, if everything goes as planned tonight." The big meeting was actually just a pretext. Thad had organized a dinner at the very place where they had had their first date, in that discreet restaurant in Beacon Hill with 18th-century stone walls. Today marked exactly 3 years since their fortuitous, or not so fortuitous, encounter on the steps of the Fairmont. As she dressed for the evening, Audra noticed that Thad seemed unusually nervous, he who was normally the embodiment of confidence. "Is everything all right?" she asked, intrigued. "Perfectly fine," he replied with a smile that didn't completely dispel his concern. "Just a busy day. The restaurant hadn't changed. Same candles casting dancing shadows, same intimate atmosphere, same sommelier who still remembered their first visit. But something was different that evening. A table had been set in a private alcove, surrounded by bouquets of pink peonies, her favorite flowers. "You've made an effort," she commented, touched by the attention. "The occasion merits it," he replied simply. The dinner was exquisite, the conversation fluid and animated, evoking memories of the 3 years past and plans for the future. Audra noticed that Thad discreetly checked his watch several times. "Are you expecting someone?" she joked. "In a way," he responded enigmatically. At dessert time, the waiter brought not the profiteroles they had ordered, but a sealed envelope on a silver tray. "What is this?" asked Audra, perplexed. "Open it," Thad encouraged her, a light of anticipation in his gaze. Inside was a simple card with an address in Beacon Hill and a time, 10 p.m. "I don't understand." "Trust me," he said, standing and offering her his hand. "Our evening is just beginning." A taxi dropped them off at the foot of Beacon Hill. Hand in hand, they climbed the cobblestone streets to a small square that Audra had never noticed before. There, in a circle of antique lampposts, a string quartet was waiting, beginning to play softly as they approached. "Thad." "What?" He placed a finger on her lips, inviting her to listen to the melody, an instrumental version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, the song they had heard the night they decided to face the media storm together. Then, to her great surprise, other people emerged from the adjacent streets. Her parents, specially come from Vermont, Wren and Meredith, her faithful friends, Gideon Everett, leaning on his cane but with a lively gaze, and even, to her greatest astonishment, Vivian and Harlan Everett, evidently uncomfortable but present. "What's happening?" she murmured, moved and confused. Thad took her hands in his, and suddenly she understood. Her heart began to beat faster. "Audra," he began, his voice unusually emotional, "when you spilled that champagne on your dress 3 years ago, I thought it was the beginning of a well-calculated strategy. I never would have imagined that it would be the beginning of the most beautiful improvisation of my life." He took a deep breath. You taught me that true strength doesn't reside in control, but in adaptability. Not in the appearance of perfection, but in honesty in the face of imperfections. His eyes never left hers as he slowly knelt on the uneven cobblestones of the square. Our relationship has never followed a conventional path. The age difference, the professional obstacles, the family pressures, none of it followed the script that society would have written for us. He pulled a small box from his pocket. But that's precisely why our story is so precious. We wrote it ourselves without worrying about conventions. Opening the box, he revealed a delicate ring, not an ostentatious diamond as might have been expected, but an emerald surrounded by small pearls, a design both classic and unique. This ring belonged to my grandmother, he explained. Gideon insisted it should be yours, as a symbol of continuity between respect for traditions and embracing change. Audra felt tears welling up, but she held them back, wanting to clearly see this moment that she knew she would cherish forever. Audra Winters, would you agree to continue writing this improbable story with me? To find this impossible balance between our worlds, our generations, our visions? Would you marry me? Time seemed suspended over the small Beacon Hill square. The quartet had stopped playing. The spectators were holding their breath. Even the Boston wind seemed to have stopped to hear her answer. Audra looked at the man kneeling before her. Not the powerful businessman the world knew, but the vulnerable, imperfect, and authentic man she had learned to love. She looked around her, at her family, her friends, and even Thad's family, all gathered despite their differences. And she understood that this was the essence of their journey together, not erasing differences, but learning to build bridges over chasms that seemed insurmountable. Yes, she answered simply, her voice clear and assured in the silence of the Boston night. Yes, I will marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her under the applause of their intimate circle, Audra felt a deep certainty. This wasn't a fairy tale ending, but the beginning of a new chapter in a very real story, with its challenges, its compromises, and its imperfect beauty. Later that night, from Beacon Hill, they contemplated illuminated Boston, their hands intertwined, the emerald ring catching the moonlight. "What are you thinking about?" asked Thad, noticing her thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking about everything that brought us here," she responded. "How what seemed like obstacles, our age difference, our worlds so far apart, even the conflicts with your family, actually made us stronger." He nodded, understanding perfectly. "The balance of souls," he murmured. "That's what my grandfather calls those rare relationships, where differences don't cancel each other out, but complement each other." Audra smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "The balance of souls," she repeated. "I like that." Below, Boston continued its eternal dance between tradition and innovation, between glorious past and uncertain future, just as they would continue their own dance, finding day after day that delicate balance between two worlds, two generations, two visions of life that, against all odds, had found their perfect harmony. For at the heart of it, isn't that the essence of true love? Not finding someone who perfectly resembles us, but someone whose differences complete us, challenge us, and ultimately transform us into a richer, deeper, and more authentic version of ourselves. And as the night enveloped the city in its starry mantle, Audra and Thad remained there, embraced silhouettes against the majestic backdrop of eternal Boston, living embodiment of this universal, yet so personal truth.